Q&A is available here. You can ask the questions there. We ask you to just kind of keep it on topic for now. If you have additional questions, we do have the CakeFest chat in our CakePHP Slack channel. So make sure you join all of those. It'll just kind of give you some additional interaction with the speakers and such. Remember, keep everything positive. We hope that you enjoy the workshops today. We just want to give a quick thank you to all of our sponsors of CakeFest 2020, Cake Development Corporation, Passbolt, Mark Software, and RingCentral for allowing us to host through their platform. So thank you guys all for joining us. We are going to get started because, like I said, we want to stay on time, on topic. Make sure you use the Q&A. You can interact with us, join all of our chats. And our first workshop, we're going to start. Welcome, Jorge Gonzalez.
Hello. Hello, everyone. This is Jorge Gonzalez here again in the workshops. My duty today is going to be workshop 1. We're going to set up a new development environment using Docker for CakePHP 4.1. And then we are going to cover authentication, do some Ajax authentication as well. And if we have time, we will handle file uploads in a toy or example application we will be working on. Thank you for attending to workshops today. It's a busy day. I know I'll try to stay on topic because 2 hours run fast. So ask any questions you want here in the Slack channel. And I'll be watching Slack channel and try to answer your questions on the fly. If they are long or a little bit off topic, someone else will answer, or we will keep in touch later. I'll be around all day, okay, in the Slack channel. So no problem. I'm going to start sharing screen here. Okay. So great. That's going to be workshop 1. This year is going to be 4 sessions, 2 hours each. And we're going to start from scratch in a blank box. And we're going to set up a development environment there. Here you can find the code, the database, and the slides. Just in case you want, I'm going to post this in the CakeFest Slack channel there, so you can follow the session. It says workshop, but when we were discussing this year about how to do it, because we will not have 2 full days this year, and maybe the interaction is going to be harder being online, we decided to go it as more as a show or a master class, if you want to call it that way. And then we'll be watching for questions, for any questions happening, and try to answer as quick as we can. Okay. So this is me. Here's some references and emails in case you want to contact me later for questions or additional support. And anyways, I'll be there in the chat if you need anything from me. Let me move this out so you can have a better experience here. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a development environment. Then we are going to talk about the configuration of a CakePHP project. And we are going to develop today an example application. We're going to use the same example application through the day. It's going to be some very simple media application where you can upload files and tag files and share files and, well, do all these things related with media assets, images or videos if you want. And first steps in our project, in a CakePHP project, are going to be setting up a development environment. There are many ways to set up a development environment. You can use your own environment. Okay, this is typical setup if you work with different projects, or if you work in a very stable set of dependencies. You can just configure and install PHP, PHP 7.4, for example. You can configure a couple dependencies or extensions in PHP. If you need to access databases, all these things, right? Then you will need to set up Composer, and you will be using Composer to create a CakePHP project from scratch using the CakePHP skeleton application, CakePHP app. Or you can use any bundle package, XAMPP or similar packages that are distributed as bundles. You can just download the thing and extract, and it works. Second approach maybe would be using some kind of virtual machine, Vagrant Box or similar. You have this reference here in the case you don't know what to use. It's a very small article I created a couple years ago. Well, yeah, a couple years ago, when we were doing or using Vagrant for our training sessions in the Cake Software Foundation. And you can use this one. It's a little bit old, but it just works. So just Vagrant, set up your file, and then Vagrant up, and you will have a full development environment set up, ready to rock, right? And then a third way, there are many, right? Third way to set up your development environment could be using Docker, and this is what we are going to use today. For our application, we are selecting Postgre 13 and any PHP stack based on 7.4. It could be Nginx base or Apache or nothing, or well, there are many options you can pick, but well, any of them, as long as it is PHP 7.4, it will work for us. So first step would be creating a CakePHP project. So let me do that. I'm going to use Composer, which is already installed in my system. I'm going to put this up here and make it bigger so you can read it. Let me know if you cannot read my screen or if there are any other problems. Let me go to, yeah, we are recording the session actually. So, and the recording will be shared. Yeah, Maxime, thank you for the question. And actually, I'm gonna start recording locally, just in case. But Amanda already started the recording, so no problem. Composer, let me go to get there, any folder, Composer, create project, CakePHP app, right? There's a dash. And I'm gonna call this project CakeFest. Why not? So, well, Composer will basically download the project from GitHub. CakePHP app. Sorry. CakePHP /app. So Composer will go to this CakePHP app repo, download the repo, check this Composer JSON file, all the requirements here and here, download all the requirements, and then run this post create project, run this little script here, post install, which basically will run, you can see it here in the oh yeah, I'm sorry for that. It's not too noisy, so I'm not proud of it. So it's just the sound it does. Then you will go, well, as you can see, after downloading, installing, post install here, it runs a couple, well, it will do a couple things, like, for example, creating an app local configuration. It will create logs and TMP folders, and then I'm going to say yes to set default permissions to all these files, right? Good. What we have now is a new folder, CakeFest, here. This folder has, well, let me make this bigger, or even better, let me start an IDE so you can see the folders here and everything. Well, I use PHP Storm. There are other IDEs out there. We are not affiliated with PHP Storm, but well, there are other free editors as well, like Visual Studio Code or NetBeans or Kphp, whatever you find better, BI, Emacs, so anything is good. Here's the project. Here's the project skeleton, so you can see Sublime. Yep. Here's the project skeleton here. You can see it will match the structure of the project we have defined here, and the skeleton. And obviously, well, you have additional files and folders because Composer was executed. Everything related to Composer will be here in the vendor folder. We should never touch the contents of vendor, so we can keep the dependencies clean. And when they upgrade, we won't have problems because of that. Then this folder here is new, for example. New from Cake 3 to Cake 4. Templates is now a separate folder. And you can see here that we are going to store PHP templates in it. And we are going to separate what is a template versus what is a source code or class file, which is going to be inside of the source, right? Then, okay, we have a project. So what's the, well, we have a project, we have some code. What's going to be the next step? Next step would be create actually our development environment. Here's the link. I'm going to copy the link to you. Here's one possible configuration for this thing, right? It's going to be a some Docker compose YAML file. If you open it, oops, like this, you will see this is going to be an example development environment that we are going to create. Basically, it's going to have two services, a Postgre service and a PHP service. It has, those services are going to be based on images, existing images, one for the database, another one for the PHP environment. This image here, you can check the contents in internet or ask me later. It is a Apache-based configuration using PHP FPM, okay? Obviously, you could define better or more fine-grained your own development environment. You could, instead of rely on some other people to create the bundled PHP configuration. Well, one question here is why Postgres over MySQL? Because we can. Why not? MySQL is an excellent database as well. But this year we decided to pick Postgres for reasons. And possibly Jose Lorenzo will talk more about this later in his workshop, because he might be using some Postgres magic related to it. But MySQL is great. No reasons to pick one or the other for your project. There are many reasons to pick one or the other, but I don't think now we should discuss about it. We can talk about it later. And yeah, for today, we're going to pick Postgres. And the same, well, some bundle here. So you will have CakePHP. And if you look at this, well, we'll go back to this later. Let me just copy this into my project. I'm going to say, well, I already have this here. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to say Docker compose YAML and paste contents. Great. So then I can go here and do Docker compose up. What happens now is when you call Docker compose up, you will have Docker running on the background, creating two images or two containers if you want. One for Postgres, one for PHP. If you take a look at this now, I'm going to leave this somewhere here in the screen, okay? But I'm going to ignore this for now. Well, I can actually break it this way. Let me do that. So if you do Docker PS, now you see, well, I actually don't like this way. This way better. So you will see now we have two containers. This first one, this second one container. Do it again. Yeah. And images for them. We don't care too much about the command, but see the ports, right? This port configuration will help us to understand how can we access these things, right? So we are basically creating this image will have this port open, right? This one here. So on port 8099, we are going to send everything from localhost here to port 80 TCP on inside of the container, inside of the CakePHP container. Then we have this other port, this other container here, Postgres, and we are basically going to send this to 5442 to 5432. I've updated these ports because maybe you have a local Postgres or web server running on your environment, and you might not want those ports to collide. So I just updated them. You can tweak this file as you need. Here is the configuration for the ports, right? You can change it to whatever you want. If you want to keep 80, that's fine, right? But the thing is, once you have this run, executed in your environment, you will have these two containers, and then you can access those containers. For example, how can I access my CakePHP container? I can do docker exec it and the name of the container, in this case CakePHP, and then I can run anything inside of this container, for example, bash. So now I'm here inside of the container. Okay, can go outside of it. The same with the Postgres container. I can run PostgreSQL, and I can run PSQL. Okay. Oh, Postgres. Run PSQL. Postgres. Okay, there's no root role, right? Because we created a specific role for Postgres, having the user as my app and the password as secret, because then we don't need to modify the configuration when we are connecting from a default CakePHP application. We will see that in a bit. There's a question. Please use the Slack channel for questions. I think it's going to be easier, so I can only track one chat. But the question from Kai is, what happens about data inside Postgres? Yeah, in that case, when there is a local data that is created for that container, it's going to be there. If you do compose Docker compose up and down, if you remove the container, the local data will be removed as well. Okay. Great. Then we go back to it. I'm gonna try to read only the Slack channel because there are too many screens and it's gonna be hard for me. Great. So what's next? Well, you see here on the configuration, we did a couple things, couple interesting things. Here we are mounting a volume. We are mounting the local folder into /application inside of the controller, of the component, sorry. So then what we are actually doing is telling the container that this folder here in my machine will be the application folder inside of the CakePHP container. And then we are defining a web root that is going to be application web root. So if you go here and look at your contents, you will see there is a web root folder with an index.php, which is the front controller for CakePHP. Basically, we are using the environment to change the configuration of Apache, because all these variables are prepared by these guys here who are maintaining the image, and you are able to override, how the configuration works, right? So now if you go to, let me go there. If you go to localhost 8099 HTTP, you will see this. So what's happening here is we are using localhost 8099 port. This port is coming through here, this configuration, which is a port that was opened by it was opened by Docker Compose when we did Docker Compose up, and it goes to the container in port 80, which then goes through Apache, goes through PHP FPM into the web root, that is application web root. And this application web root is mapped into web root index because these files are shared with a PHP container, okay? This is always a little bit like Inception, the movie, but hope the explanation is clear and you see there is no big magic here involved. So every time you go to localhost 8099, you will go to our project. You can see here, well, let me go back to the slides. It's not needed anymore. This one. Yeah, you can, well, list the containers running and then navigate to this address and great. We're back into configuration. So how to configure your CakePHP project? You say, here we have a config folder. Well, there are many places where you can alter the way CakePHP works. You have an application class. This is very important because it will allow you to define what means an application for CakePHP. For example, a number of middlewares that are going to be loaded, and they are going to work with the request and the response of your application. So you have the chance to alter the request before it hits your controllers, and then alter the response when it's generated from CakePHP back to the origin. Then you have a couple methods for bootstrapping your application, and as part of the bootstrapping of your application, this file bootstrap will be loaded here, and bootstrap file will basically load or ensure that you correctly bootstrap your application, obviously. And here you can see how we load configuration files. We are loading the app configuration. You see here there is an app.php. And then if there is an app local PHP, we'll load and merge that configuration as well. So you can use app local here to override any keys present in your application. On production, you will not have an app local, or you shouldn't. And you should not have secrets stored in your code as a best practice. Instead of that, we recommend you use the environment to store any sensitive information like this. For example, now we are getting, well, let me describe this a little bit real quick. You have here the application.php. Let me make it bigger. You have a couple configurations for your application, like some path configurations. These three are interesting if you're using a CDN. You can override this with the CDN prefix and use a full CDN real quick. This here is a security salt that should be a secret in your application. It is going to be something used for hashing salted passwords, for example. Here would allow you to, I usually actually override this one in my development environments. Let me show you how to do this. This is a configuration to append a timestamp of the file for all the assets, especially useful if you are in a local environment and you don't want to click or to refresh or click F5 or do it like a monkey to ensure that your assets are being loaded. I usually override this here this way. So So I always append a timestamp in my local environment. So I am sure that any CSS or JavaScript file I'm loading from CakePHP is fresh. Then I go back to the Bootstrap. Then we have here some configuration to limit the time of the cache when debug is true. This little guy here on top in the application, let me go back to it. In application.php, oh, we have a couple of raised hands. Please post your questions there in the chat if you have anything in CakeFest Slack channel. Yeah, exactly, Maxime. There is also a way to override the environment quickly in development. That is the .env file. Is this exactly the same thing? We should not be storing environment on files because those secrets can be stolen from someone else, and especially for sensitive applications. If this is an application for your cousin and it's in a local environment with no access from the internet, well, but best practice is not having secrets in code or files in your server, okay, if possible. So then here, as we were discussing, this parameter here, debug, is important, and it should always be false unless you are in debug, right? I usually override as false in production environments, and then you can set it as whatever you want in your development environment. But please always ensure that debug is false, because it's going to leak a lot of interesting information for an attacker. Great. So I was talking about overriding. Here's an override of the configuration. Now we have timestamp true for all the assets. We go back and continue here talking about the bootstrapping. You can see after loading the application, we are basically handling what's going to be our full base, then configuring the factories of CakePHP, for example, cache, consuming the cache configuration and setting up all the cache configurations available. Same for the database connection manager and so forth. And then that's it. We have a bootstrap done. We are adding a couple detectors, but that is something that we're not going to cover today. And basically, that's all we have for bootstrapping of our application. CakePHP application, that's all the configuration we have. So here are all the keys that you can touch. As you can see, I didn't touch anything for our initial environment. And the reason is, as you can see here, there is always an override from the environment. For example, if you go to the data sources, here, you can see CakePHP defines a data source default and a data source test that is going to be used on unit tests. For the default, you can define whatever you want, but then at the end here, not local, you see there is a URL parameter or a URL configuration key. This URL is basically reading from the environment database URL. This database URL was actually used here in the Docker Compose. So you can pass any environment to CakePHP like this. Here in the environment for our CakePHP container, we are passing database URL equals driver, user, password, host, and port, and then the database name. So using this specific DSN, we are connecting our CakePHP container with our Postgre container, because running services as Docker Compose, this service will have the name Postgres. So here we will be able to access this container through this port, which is the right one for Postgres. And this is going to be the database. We are also telling the Postgres service that our user is going to be my app, our password is going to be secret, our Postgres database is going to be my app. And the default configuration for CakePHP is using these values as well. So this is a way to basically not touch or don't touch any configuration file. If you're lazy as I am, you can set up your project like this for any project, any new project in CakePHP. Okay? And that's the reason we have here CakePHP is able to connect to the database, because it is, right? We are using Postgres connection and the port that is open inside of the Docker Compose network, you want to call it this way, and we are able to connect to the database using my app secret as password. Great. So now we have an environment, right? The only problem with this environment sometimes is going to be permissions, because things you do from inside of the environment are going to be done through a Docker-based user, and things you do outside of the environment are going to be done by your user. So sometimes you will need to tweak those permissions, which is not a big deal. We'll need to do it through the day today. Great, so going back here. We are going to create a media server today in workshops. It's going to be a test application, so we have something to talk about. We are going to bake an admin CRUD using the bake shell. We're going to explore a little bit the CakePHP MVC, well, models, tables, controllers, etc. First thing we're going to do is we are going to provide a login and authentication for the project. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a database schema. You can do it any way you want. I'm providing, well, actually, if you remember, I posted the reference to the code. Let me copy that again from the beginning here. Post it here. Do you remember I posted this reference before? Okay, and you can see here we have new commits 5 hours ago. And you can see here there is a CakeFest 2020 SQL file. You can see that this database dump, right? It's a regular database dump. I'm going to use the updated one. The other way you can restore a database dump or to configure your database schema locally is using migrations plugin. You can check that there are migrations as well here. So it's actually any way you want, right? We can use either migrations to execute the migrations in your project and sync your schema with the code, define schema, or we can basically get a full database dump and restore it. I'm going to show you how to do it through migrations, for example. If you remember, let me do this a little bit smaller, this one a little bit bigger. If you remember, we can run commands from inside of the containers using Docker. So Docker exec, and I don't think we don't need a TTI for this one. And we can use the name is CakePHP, and we can run bake, or we can run any shell inside of CakePHP this way. Application bin cake, right? Why application? If you remember, we are mounting this subfolder here, the local path, inside of the container as application. So that's That's the reason we are using application at the beginning, but basically it would be beancake, right? So I can run beancake migrations, migrate, and get the migrations applied. Or if you want, I can do, I can run the dump. I can get the dump from anywhere, like from Git, for example. If you go here, you go to the database dump, you can get the raw file like this. Come on. And then you can do curl this into Docker exec IT or I Postgres PSQL my app, like that. So then, well, I would need to destroy the database and create it again. This, Felipe, this is not MySQL. We are using Postgres in today, but it would the process would be very similar for MySQL as well. I'm sorry for that. So then, what do we have in the database? I can do Postgres, PSQL. Sorry, I need a TTI in this one. Okay, so then we have some tables, right? We just created some tables inside of our My App database. We have files, groups users. This one, it is a maintenance table that we shouldn't care about because here is where the migrations plugin is going to store the status of the migrations. Then we have tags, users. What do we have in users? Well, we have an ID, first name, last name, email, password, active, created. Okay, so you see here, super quickly talking about conventions, you see here the tables we created, they have an ID. We are using integers, auto increment by the database. We are defining some example columns like first, last, email, password, active is defined as a Boolean, and then created and modified are defined as timestamps, which is the default type when you pick a date time from inside of alpha migration. The same for files, for example. You can see we have an ID, a group ID. So you can see we are using underscore ID to reference columns that are going to help us to build associations later on, like using the singular form of the association and underscore ID. Okay. Then type, path, well, and so forth. This one, metadata, that is changed into JSONB. So, well, I'll change that on the fly. And create it and modify. Yeah, that's great. Then, once we have a database in place, next step would be to bake. Well, that's what we need for importing the schema. So you can see, well, one there, we curl some output, we put it into Docker exec, then the name of the image or the container, and then the command PSQL user my app, right? Already discussed about conventions. And great. So I'm gonna bake it. Same way, I'm gonna use bake from inside of the container. If you go here, I'm gonna do Docker this bake all everything. And now we have a bunch of files generated. This command here will allow you to, well, bake all, meaning bake the controller, the model, files like the table and the entity, and also bake a couple templates for typical actions like add, edit, or view. And then everything is just iterating through all the tables that are looking fine for generating the output. So what we did, actually, we generated some amount of files here. And you can see the structure of these files and the placement of these files. For example, under source, we will have in the controller, files controller, groups controller, tags controller, one file per table. Then under model, this one is broken into entities and tables, entity and table folders. You see we have one singular for each entity and one plural with the table suffix on it for each table. So we have a users table or groups users table, etc. If we take a look at the contents here, like file, you will see this is a typical entity created by Bake. It is basically empty with some configuration for the accessibility of the fields when we patch a form coming from the user land, for example. Let me go, let's not jump around. Let me go step by step. Then, that's the generated Minecraft. Tables, controllers, well, all things. One difference between this CakePHP 4 and previous versions, if you go to templates, you will see now controller-based templates are matching exactly the name of the controller, like groups controller for, groups for the groups controller. And then we have all the templates with a PHP extension. We have add or edit, right? This is a mix of HTML and PHP. So, great. How to debug and log things? Well, the first thing we need to do is to ensure that we have permission to edit these files. Remember, we created those files with different users. That is not a big deal. You can basically do this change once, and you can do chmod, for example, like this. And I'm gonna, well, chmod, no, I'm gonna change to my user, all the source, template, config. Config I didn't touch that folder, so I think this will work. Great. So now I can change files, no problem. And yeah, that's a good one. So well, okay, once we have this done, how can debug and log things? Let's say, okay, I'm gonna go to my users. Oh, permissions again. Sorry, forgot to update this one. This is development, so I don't care. This way, permissions fixed. Now we can write into TMP and log folders from inside or outside of the container. So yeah, we have users. Well, the database dump had one user created. We don't care. We can delete this one. Why not? And what happens here? How can you basically debug and know what's going on here? First thing is we have debug kit available here at the bottom. You can use debug kit to basically expose the internals of your CakePHP application. You can see how the request looks like, what are the cookies that were exchanged, how the routing params were extracted, what's the content of the routing params extracted. You can see the routes you have defined in your application. You can see the queries you are actually doing and the time they are taking. This could be a first step for query optimization or checking or detecting bottlenecks in your application. You have a timer where you can see, well, all the actions that happened and the time they took. So as well, you can use this one as a first entry point to remove any bottlenecks, or at least reduce those bottlenecks. And you can see all the variables that are exchanged between the controller and the view. So that's debugged. That's okay. I can debug things using those tabs. I also have a history. So I can go back in the history here and see the actual delete queries that were done when I deleted my user before. And I can see, well, if any log output or any email is sent, it will be logged here. Okay, that's for history. Then another way to debug things in CakePHP, if I go to a controller, for example, let me go to users controller, users controller. So this method here, public action index, would be the index action and would be the method that is executed when I run this page. This one is the same as this one, index, and it is using the default or the CakePHP default routing, basically, to map the name of the controller, the name of the action into users controller, the name with controller suffix, and then public function index as an action. Okay. Then here I can do this. Right. Good old debug. I just die. I will debug some value like the request. And die. Right? I have some ability here to navigate the values of whatever I'm debugging, and well, not bad. Debug and die. Yes, you can debug as well. These well, users. Okay, if you don't wanna break the status, and you have here, well, a problematic debug output, right? That could be one way. Then the second way would be using debugger class. Sometimes you want to send a verbose stack trace of something to the log files, especially when you're debugging. There is a utility class which is debugger. You can use a log function and then send whatever you want. 1, 2. If you run this code now, you will see here you're sending something to the debug, all these mess, right? And if you look at the logs debug.log, you will see here all this trace that was sent to the log with all the stack trace. So here's what you get, right? You can see all the stack trace and then whatever you want to send to the debug. And the third thing is basically using the logger class or debugging queries through the query log. One recurring question in the Slack channel is how can I see the queries I'm sending to the database? Well, one way is using debug-kit, right? Another way is to log them. So you can go here to the configuration, app local. I want to log the default data source. So I can say log true. And then everything I do here, I will get a new file here under logs queries with the complete SQL I'm sending to the database. In this case, select and count, right? This one, well, you get the idea, right? So sometimes it's useful either in your main default data source or in your test data source to just enable debug and see what's going on. Okay, so let's keep going. As always, I'm going to talk very quickly about the model layer. We are going to add a validation rule for passwords, and then we're going to hash the password. Okay. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I will ensure here that our password has a specific length. If you go to source, model, table, sorry, entity, and table, you will see here that we have user, entity, and users table. If you take a look at any table generated by Bake, you will see we have three things. 1, 2, and 3. We have initialize method that will basically tell this class how to map the class with the table in the database. Second one is validation default that will show you rules or will define rules that are attached to this validator object. So later on, when we need to validate an entity, it will execute this validation and return errors, if any. And build rules, that is a set of rules that we can use or we will use before the entity is persisted in the data source. Let's talk about validation now. You can see here, there's a set of rules. They always start with validator, function, name of the function, and then the field. And what we actually want to do is to add some length to the passwords. So I can go here and say mean length password, an integer. It could be 8. Wow, you know, 8 is not a lot, but and then a message optional, and it could create this way. Say password mean length should be at least characters. Okay, one way we can do this would be this. This is a magic string. It's a bad practice. So maybe it could be a good placement for a constant or a configuration, right? So let's say we want to define a constant and say, okay, we want to define a constant for the length of the password. So we can go here and say constant password length in equals 8, right? So then I can go back here and say user this. This could be a typo. I never okay. Should be a typo, right? I never remember. Sorry. Someone correct me, please. Then the length, user and password length. Right. So then if I go back here, create a new user and do something like this, set as active, example.com, AB, submit, we will have, password should have at least 8 characters, right? So I'm going to say password, and yeah, we have a user created, but that's a problem, right? We are storing passwords clean in the database, which is a very bad practice because, well, obviously it's a very bad practice. And the next step we need to do is to hash this password, so we store it hashed inside of the database. We can use the user as well to ensure not only every time we store the password in the database is hashed, but every time we put a password inside of the entity is hashed. So later on, if anyone is inspecting the user entity for some reason, they will not have access to a clear password inside of the entity. We can do this using a mutator function, protected function set password, and then we get a password and we return possibly a string. So then if the string password, then 0. So if we have something in the password and be this, then return new default password hasher, which is a class CakePHP provides, so it will handle hashing of passwords in a secure way, and calling then hash and passing the password. Right. So great. So now every time we create a new user entity and set a password into it, it will be stored as a hash of that password inside of the entity. After that, when the user is saved, we are going to save the hash, not the plain value, right? So if we edit this and say password is password, well, we actually need to change it. Let me change to password 1. When you save it, you will get this hash, right? We shouldn't be displaying those hashes, but that's for another day. For now, we have a way to change validation before saving. We have a way to alter the values of some of the fields before or when they are updated inside of the entity. We also have accessors that work in a similar way, but instead of underscore set is underscore get, and they will basically allow you to generate calculated fields inside of the entity. And then we are able to start dealing with authentication, right? Because the objective of hashing those passwords is then to allow the configuration of the authentication plugin so we can actually log in into the application, right? So far, so good. Let me keep going here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to install the CakePHP authentication plugin. So we go here to our project and then composer require CakePHP authentication. We get this plugin, CakePHP authentication, that will help us to configure our application to successfully logged users in. Here's the package, install. The next thing I'm gonna do is to call bean cake plugin install authentication. Sorry, plugin load. There we go. And if you go to your application class, you will see this line was added here. So now you are aware, or you make CakePHP aware of the authentication plugin. That is not doing anything yet, because next step we will need to do is basically hook one of the middlewares that the plugin provides to our application. Well, the CakePHP authentication plugin allows you to handle the authentication before your controller layer, before your application request hits any of your controllers. So all the authentication happens here at the middleware layer. If you add a new middleware, let me add a new one here. I'm gonna add it at the end. I'm gonna add a new middleware, and this new middleware is gonna be new authentication middleware. The authentication middleware, well, the authentication middleware has a number of ways to configure or to be configured. I usually like to do it this way, which is calling a function like this authentication service or this get authentication service, right? I think it's a good name for it. And then create a new function, protected function. This function will return an authentication service. Get service function will return authentication service, like this. And this function is basically going to help me to define how the authentication service is going to be. I'm going to call it service and say new authentication service. And I'm going to configure this authentication service with, there are a number of parameters that you can use on the authentication service. If you take a look on the code, all of these parameters, right? For now, I'm going to say, please, if the user is not authenticated, let me go there again. If the user is not authenticated, go to users login. Right? That's it. That's the service. Then, I was about to say luego, sorry for that. Then we have a way to load the identifiers and authenticators. An identifier is a way to configure how are you going to, or how are you going to inspect, in this case, the database to pull the credentials or to pull the user. Then an authenticator is going to be a way to tell CakePHP how to extract the data needed for the identifier from somewhere. It could be a session, could be a form, could be somewhere else, right? So we're going to create one of them, like a service load identifier, and I'm going to create authentication password, because our identifiers are going to be based on a username and a password. And then I'm gonna say service load authenticator. I'm gonna pass the authentication session, because if the credentials are already in the session, I don't want to do anything else, just return them as they are. And then form, and pass a configuration, because I will only try to log in from a form if the URL is users login. So this is like a filter. So if the form is not posted into this URL, I'm not gonna even try to check. If the post comes from this page, I will check the credentials, extract the data from the form, and then pass it and use the password identifier to pull that record from the database. If it is there, cool. If it is not, then failure, right? Right. So next thing would be what happens. Okay, next thing. Now we have authentication. Well, I need to return it, right? This, because if not, it's going to be problematic. A couple questions here. One then has a reply. Can login URL be an array of URLs? I think so. Or you can add many of them. You can alias. I think they can be an array. We need to check this in the form authentication. Authenticator here. Login URL. So login URL. Yeah. No. Build login URL. Oh, I would like. I don't actually see this. Result. It with path. No, that's the error. Check URL. This is the method. Request. Get config. We have a URL checker. So URL checker. I will need to see if it, okay, yeah, it could be an array. Right? So yes, you can pass either one URL or many URLs. Or you can define additional authenticators. If one, you can have several with different configuration. You can use the same one as long as you define, I think it is a different alias for it, and then a class name. So it's similar to loading helpers or components or anything else that you have an alias that must be unique, and you can alias and define several and point to the same class name. Okay, great. So good. We have something. Then next thing we would need to do is, because now we have authentication in place. I mean, we are checking authentication on every request. But if you go to the application, you will see no difference because nobody's doing anything with that information. Yes, my use statements are auto-completed, and this is a default feature of PHP Storm and other IDEs. Yeah. Okay. Then what happens here? Well, I actually have I actually did pass through authentication, but no one is doing anything with that. So one way to ensure that we don't display pages that are not authenticated is using authentication component. Here on your app controller, you can load a component, authentication. I think it was authentication, or else. Let me check that real quick. Yeah, authentication. So now you won't be able to do anything, and you will get a weird error. So if you're using authentication plugin, you will get to this possibly sometime. It's very frustrating because you have no way to debug it because, well, this error is not provided by CakePHP, it's provided by others. And the problem is we get to this page, users, right? We get to this page, users index. We are not authenticated. So we redirect to users login, and we are not authenticated. And this page requires authentication. So basically, we redirect back to users login. We are not authenticated, and so forth. So this is the error that you're seeing here. So how to fix the error would be we would be creating a login action on the users controller that we will improve later. Public function login, right? And then we say login goes here. Why not? We won't be able to see it yet, right? Because there is a piece missing here that is ensuring that this specific action does not require authentication. And we can do this using before filter on the controller, like public function before filter, call the parent, and at this point we say this and authenticate authentication allow authenticated and you pass an array with the action. So this function here will tell the authentication component that we are loading here, right? It will tell the authentication component, don't worry about login, don't do any checks, right? So then you can go here to your page, reload it, and at least we get this, right? Okay, what would be the next step? Next step would be, you go slides for reference. We did this already. Here in authentication. Identifier, well, we have a couple of identifiers available, like password, LDAP, token, well, a couple of them. We have a couple of authenticators as well defined. Some of them are stateless, some of them are not. So you can see an S here for stateless authenticators. Session form, well. And then here's the process. Run the middleware, go through the authentication service, and then run through all the authenticators defined. And if any of them is okay, we win, return this identity, and persist the identity if the authenticator is not stateless. And then basically redirect based on unauthenticated or login redirect, right? Then we get to the configuration. We did already, and we are logging the user in. This is what we are actually doing right now. We have an empty function that we are going to complete at the end of the file. And this empty function will basically handle the login process for the user. You can see here me go back. Yeah, I have 45 minutes, so I'm gonna try to be very, very quick. Right. So let's create a login form. First thing is, okay, I want to restrict this action a little bit and say this request allow method, and we want to restrict to get or post, no others. Then I'm going to check if the request is post. And if the request is post, I will do login here. For now, I'm doing nothing, right? If the request is get, I will continue and show the login form. By convention, when CakePHP is finishing the action, it will look for a template with the name login.php under templates users login. Let me create this file, login.php, and I'm not gonna type this one. I'm gonna copy this one from elsewhere because this is a pretty straightforward form that we are gonna show to the user. We're gonna use the flash helper here to render any auth-related message to the user, like invalid credentials or whatever like that. We are gonna create a form. Always remember to create and end the form, especially if you're using CSRF. So all the tokens are created correctly. Especially if you're using the form protection for generating those tokens and protect your forms from form tampering. Then we have two controls, username, password, and login. So what we have here is, go back here. Now we have a nice form with a username and the password. Problems. Well, this form does nothing yet. That's a problem. And the second problem is we don't have a username. Oh God, we have an email. So we need to fix this to use the email. That's also a pretty common question we get, like, how can I use an email? Well, we're going to use an email. The difference would be we need to update the configuration for the authentication plugin. So if you go back to your application, here, you need to say, okay, I want to have custom fields. Sorry. I'm going to copy the fields here. Interface. Okay. So you see, I'm telling the password identifier, hey, the username will be email and the password will be password, right? That's one thing. And the second configuration I need to do is in the form itself, I need to also pass the fields to it. And an email and a password. What else? Obviously the form itself will change because now we need to have email instead. Yep. And what else? We will need to actually add some logic to the login itself. But for now, you go to the login. Now you have an email, right? That's great. And the rest of the content for the login action is what we need to add now. We need to go to the users controller and then do login. How can we do login? First thing is we get the result of the authentication. If you remember, authentication runs as a middleware, so everything already happened when we get to this point. So we are just getting the result of what happened on the authentication step. And then based on the result, if the result is valid, we do something. If the result is not valid, then we will say, oh, problem, invalid credentials, right? So if the result is valid, we're going to redirect to whatever place we want. Let me copy that code because that's not very funny to follow. Right? We are going to redirect to whatever it is in the query param redirect, or to a specific controller action display, and the name of the page will be home. Okay, this is the first thing. So if we get to this point on the login, if we are posting, because this is the user's login, we will go through authentication form authenticator. It will extract email and password, check email and password versus whatever we have in the database. If that is found, we will get an identity. The identity will be posted as an attribute in the request and the result as well. And we can pull this information using authentication get result, and result will be valid or not. If it is valid, fine, we are already authenticated. So we redirect to whatever place we wanted to go. If it is not valid, then we display some kind of error message like this one. All right. Well, actually, we don't need to check for post here yet, because that is going to happen. It doesn't matter. Sorry for that. And let me copy the post check here, like this. Okay, so if we get to the login page and we are already logged in, we redirect. It doesn't matter if it is a post or not. If we get to the login page, posting, and the result is not valid, then we flash a message, invalid username or password. Let's see how that works. It was admin example, and the password was password 1. Password 1, or it was other example, and password 1. Yes, okay, that's the one. Right, so now we are logged in. How do we know that we are logged in? Well, you can check, again, you can check the identity at any point, or if you want to go here and, users controller, anytime or any place here, you can inspect the authentication result, or you can check for an identity. You can do something like this and say, this request get attribute identity, and here you will, this is index. And this is going to be the authentication identity that will provide you methods to extract some data from it, right? As data, we have a user, right? And well, all the data for that user. But at this point, we are authenticated. Great. So another thing that is that happens usually is oh, okay, I want to authenticate a user, but I also want to bring some details of the user, some associations, for example. Well, can do this using a resolver or configuring the resolver that we are actually using on the password authenticator. We go to the application and we can add a configuration for it. Here we have fields, but also we can add this parameter resolver and then specify configuration for our resolver. In this case, the class name is Authentication ORM, and user model is users. And here's the thing, finder. We can define a finder that will be used when we pull the data from the database to check the user. And that is the data that's going to be passed along to the identity. So what if we run this code now? Well, we need to log out, actually. Sorry. Let me quickly add a logout function. I'm going to copy this from here. So we have a way to log out because it's going to be hard to log in again. Well, we can always remove the cookie, but well, not going to do that. I'm going to add a new function in users controller. Public function logout, and say this authentication, was this authentication logout, maybe? I don't find that piece, but I will. This authentication logout, I think it was. Please. I think that was. Let me redirect to login. Login. Return. Okay. And then let me try and users logout. Yep, that's it. So logging out will clear the cookie with the session. Well, and will basically ensure that you get to clean slate status, so you can then try and log in again. If we try to log in now with this, we will get unknown finder method auth. How can we create a new finder for it? We can go to the users table and we can basically create a new function for it, which would be public function find and the name of the finder. In this case, we call the finder auth, so find auth. And then the finders always return a query. And they take a query as a first parameter and some options as the second parameter. Like this. In this case, what we want to do is not only we want to check whatever it was being checked before, but also we want to retrieve the groups of the user. So these, so return query, and then we're going to call contain, which is one of the functions in the query object to contain the groups of that user. Okay. Then if we try again, okay, we're back here. And now if we debug this user, can go again to app controller. We could do something like this, for example, public function before render, and say this, and then if this class attribute identity then this set like this. So then now I will have an identity variable by default in all my templates. Well, that I can check later. You see, we don't have groups now because the user has no groups. Well, we can add a group and fix that. Sorry. Let me go to the users. Let me edit this one. Oh, I need a group possibly. I go to groups. Oh, we have one. Then let me ensure that this new user is in group 1. Good. And now let me log out. And log in again as this user here. And I will see my identity has also groups collected, which is this one, right? So now you have a way to log in, tweak or configure a little bit the login to use an email. And also you have a way to modify how, let me go to users table, to modify how the query is working when you retrieve the data and you configure the identity object. That could be useful later for a number of things in your views. Okay. Great. Well, let's keep going. We have half an hour ahead, and because we have half an hour ahead, I'm gonna do a quick little change here on the rest of the things or the items for today. I'm gonna skip Ajax Login because this is mostly JavaScript and you have the code in the repo. I'm gonna jump into uploading files because this could be useful for others after me in the workshops. And I'm gonna add this action. And if we have time at the end, we will go back to Ajax Login so you can see how that's done in your project. So let me go to this one, and we're going to modify the files add template so we can upload files actually. And first thing is I want to change the form. I'm going to change the form. If you go now to the form, I'm logged in, so I should be able to. I'm going to files, right? These are all the files we have in the system. No files. I can add a file, setting a group, a name, type, path, and some metadata to it. I think this might fail because metadata is defined as JSONB, or well, we'll see. And if not, we'll fix it we'll fix it at the same time, no problem. We'll check then how this form is created. When I add a new file, if you remember, files controller, add action, so the template should be templates, files, add. So this form does not allow uploading files now, and we're gonna basically change it. I'm gonna say submitted file here, and I'm gonna say this is file control. So we will get this browse button, and we can then explore and upload a file. Next thing important is to remember that we need to tell CakePHP to create the form as type file, like this. So now if I go back here and add this one, I have a group selector, and then I have files that I can pick whatever I want and upload, right? Great. If I upload a file now, it won't do anything. So I'm not going to waste the time because this here is a new field. I'm removing some fields that are required. So if I try and do something like this, then, well, the file could not be saved. Why could not be saved? I don't see any errors. In this case, it's useful to go here to your file entity, check for the errors, and you will see errors displayed like this. You require a name, a type, and a path. So, well, we require all these things, and we don't have them. So how can we deal with those items? So we ensure that we generate those submitted files. There are a number of ways. I'm going to use one way today that is maybe not the best way, but also will help me to talk about behaviors and talk about before Marshall method. So what we are going to do is we're going to create a behavior, and we are going to attach the behavior to the form because we want all the features of the upload contained in one class. So we can then modify the way anything is uploaded to the server through a behavior. So we go here and we are going to bake a new behavior, cake, bake, behavior, upload. There we go. We have a new file. Well, we have many files, but well, many now. We have 2 files. But the file I'm talking about is under model behavior upload behavior. And let me ensure permissions are okay. Ch home. Okay, sorry for that. And then, okay, we have an empty behavior. So a behavior is going to contribute with all the callbacks to the class or the table that is attached to. So any callback, any table callback we define here inside of the behavior will be loaded into the table, and the table will execute the same callback. And also methods here will be available in the table as well. So how can we deal with this? We are going to first ensure that the behavior is loaded on the table. Let me go leaning out this a little bit. I'm going to the files table, not the test, files table, right? We have our files table, and then here we ensure that we add the behavior upload, right? Now we have an upload behavior, and here what we are going to do is we are going to define a before Marshall function before Marshall that I will copy from here. Like this. Okay, so now we have before Marshall function. Before Marshall function will be executed right before the entity is generated from a data array. So for example, if you patch an entity from a data array, you will have a chance to fix the array before the actual entity is patched, is created, right? So actually, what we are going to do is we are going to get the submitted file here from the data array. If you look at the I just added this. If you go to request here, you see here's the post data, right? We are posting two fields, group ID and submitted file. So I'm getting the submitted file from the posted data. If we have one, then I'm going to tweak the data a little bit, and I'm going to provide the required fields. You remember we have a type that is required, and I'm going to do this using submitted file. Get, well, let me add this line here because we know the submitted file is a uploaded file. Here, submitted file. And now I will be able to navigate the get client media type, right? Then, oops, what I'm doing here, this is equals. Then the same for the name. I'm gonna override the name as get client file name. And I could override here and add some metadata, right? I'm not gonna do it now. I'm possibly gonna do it later. And the last thing is we need to have some path. So data path, and we are gonna pick a path to store our files. Because, well, this is obviously a very simple way to do it, right? So I'm gonna keep it simple. I'm gonna save my files in root files, and I'm gonna use text to generate a UUID, which is something more or less random, okay? And it will work for today. There are many great plugins for uploading files in CakePHP. I would recommend you to go to the awesome list here. There it is. Let me paste that link here. And then you will find a lot of options. For example, for file uploading, you have, well, many options here you can pick from. And yeah, you will have different configuration and different engines to store files to S3 or whatever is needed, right? Then once we get to this point, we will basically be able to save the file. So if you see, before Marshall is messaging the data array a little bit, so we will have all the required fields in the data array. So when the file is saved, we can save the file actually. So if we try this again, file cannot be saved. Well, let me pick this one. So could not be saved. Oh, I know what's going on. There's one thing, something important here that is we need to ensure, or we need to remember as well, to add the submitted files to the accessible array in the entity. So model entity file, we need to add it here. Submitted file, right? Then try it again. Add the file, browse. And adding these. What's the
Excuse me,
problem?
Jorge. Before
Yep.
Marshall spelling is with one L.
Oh man. Okay, that's okay. Are you sure? Okay. I believe in you. Resend. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for that. I don't know. Oh, Edward. Thank you for the spelling. Great. So we have now files. We have now one file in the database. Obviously, we did not upload anything. If you go to this path, which, by the way, is a path inside of our Docker container, you will see nothing, right? First thing we need to do is to ensure we have a files folder to be able to save this. So what I would do is create it. Okay, files, and then touch files, keep. So now we have a folder that is going to hold our files. We are not saving the file yet. And when could we save the file? I will choose to save the file on the after save event. So I have the chance to validate the entity, and then after the entity is validated and correct and saved into the database, I will use this method move to from the uploaded file class to move the submitted file into the path that we created here. So now back to my files, I can pick, select anything here, submit. I'm creating a new entry in my files table. And now if I go here, I will see this file uploaded, right? If I open this file as an image, this is going to be the file, right? So obviously, not production ready code. Don't do this in production because you will possibly want to ensure that your files are not uploaded to your server, but uploaded to a third-party service or whatever. But at least we have a way to upload files, so we can continue with the demo if needed later in the following workshops. We have 12 minutes ahead. If you have any questions, I think it's now a good time to deal with them. If not, I can jump into Ajax Login, but I am not 100% sure that we will be able to finish it. I'm going to copy paste code quickly, but even in that case, I don't know if we are going to be able to finish it. So jump in, ask any questions if you have any, or I will get into Ajax Login and try to do it real quick. Questions? No questions? I see someone's writing something. I'll wait for them or jump quickly into Ajax. They are going to be big questions. Just say yes or no if you have a question. So I don't be waiting here. I think I'm going to jump into Ajax Login and see where we get to. And that should be somehow simple. So Ajax Login. I'm going to start by creating a login page, right? We will need some script in JavaScript to basically wrap a form and send it via Ajax to the server, and we will need an endpoint to handle that. So hopefully we will have the time. I'm gonna at least copy paste everything real quick and explain. We are going to replace the homepage first. Let me go to the homepage under pages, home, why not? Get rid of this, and we are gonna create a new homepage like this. And let me explain that quickly. If if we are not logged in, we're going to display a form, and we're going to load a JavaScript file. We're going to load a JavaScript file login.javascript, and we're going to log in there at the bottom. Okay. Oh, let me check Q&A. Sorry. Let me, before we too fast. Okay. What plugins are you using for autocomplete? How did you set it up? Okay. Well, autocomplete, you mean the code, right? Autocomplete the PHP code. We are, yeah, well, for autocomplete, I would strongly recommend you to take a look at this plugin. Let's see if I have it here. No, it's the error mark, actually. But I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you here. I think it's the best thing is to get to the reference, and then it was where it is. Okay, here it is. So IDE helper, this one. This is a must have in possibly all the projects, especially if you're using PHP Storm, because this line here that I was using in the files table, this, sorry, in the upload behavior, this line here is needed, but this line here in the when you reference a component or a helper is not needed, because this plugin will help you to run through all the dependencies and basically pull from it. Yeah. AdMat reference is great as well. He was pointing out this link. This is a recommendation for all the projects when starting to use Asset Compress, IDE helper, and PHP stand. Good one. Okay, we have 7 minutes. I will keep going. We were basically adding a form to be able to do Ajax Login on the home page. The next thing we need to ensure is that we can see this page even if we are not logged in, the same as we did with the login. So users controller, the same we did for the login is to tell authentication to ignore the home page, right? So I'm going to add this in the pages controller, and I'm going to say display, right? So then, for example, this authentication would be auto-completed if we were using IDE helper. You run the helper, and it will basically inspect your code and generate all the references. We have the error mark share later today in the workshop number 4. So if you have any specific question, he's the guy. Then if we go here to the homepage, okay, our homepage, because we are logged in, I'm going to log out. And now if I go back to the homepage, here's the homepage, and here's the form. The form does nothing. One of the things it does nothing, one of the reasons it does nothing is we are injecting a script nowhere. If you look at the homepage, we are injecting a script in a block that does not exist. So we need to create a blog. We're going to create a blog inside of the templates layout default. We are going to create a nice blog here. And the name was footer something. Footer script. Okay, great. So then once we have the blog here, it will inject a script that does not exist yet. So let me create a file for it and put some JavaScript in it so it will work. I'm going to copy the script from my repo. Okay, login.js. So under web root, JavaScript, I'm going to create a new file, login.js. That's going to be the content. It's plain JavaScript. I'm not using an external library. I'm basically going to grab the contents of the login form and then post those contents to user's login. And then I'm going to check if the response is valid. And I'm going to say you're now logged in via Ajax. And if the response is not valid, I'm going to say invalid credentials. That is what I'm going to do. So last thing is to ensure that we handle this from inside of the login action. So I need to go to users controller, our login method, and I'm going to replace my login method with this one. That's all the content. Right? This is not needed. So the same. I'm gonna check the result of the authentication, but I have this branch here. If it is an application JSON, then I will get the identity, if any, and set the identity and say, please serialize valid and identity, and return. So now if I go back to, oops, something wrong here, possibly I'm missing. Okay. So now if I go to my page again and reload it, let me check if my script was loaded correctly on the network. Okay, we have a login.js, right? I can try and put some wrong credentials. Oops, invalid credentials. And now I can try and put some valid credentials. And you're now logged in via Ajax undefined. Undefined because I'm not possibly passing the identity correctly. Not a problem, but you get the idea, right? If I go to any page now, like users, I can see the users page. I can actually go to users logout. If I go now to the home page, you will see here on the network tab, I'm gonna request email and password. This is the post, and this is the response. Valid true and identity. Okay. I think I'm running out of time. Well, not yet, but it will happen in 1 minute. If you have any last questions, I'm very happy to answer them. I'll be around all day in the Slack channel. I hope you enjoyed those contents and maybe learned something today. Very happy to be here as every year, very proud of it. And next week or the next one, remember, we keep doing our training as we do monthly. We have monthly sessions in training.kphp.org. You can go now if you want and register for the next one, which is going to be a getting started with CakePHP 4 with a donation to the Cake Software Foundation. Okay, it's going to be October the 15th. Thank you for attending and ready to pass the ball to the next one.
Thank you, Jorge.